The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke. There was a scholar of the law who stood up to test Jesus and said, "Teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life?" Jesus said to him, "What is written in the law? How do you read it?" He said in reply, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your being, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself." He replied to him, "You have answered correctly. Do this, and you will live." But because he wished to justify himself, he said to Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" Jesus replied, "A man fell victim to robbers as he went down from Jerusalem to Jericho. They stripped and beat him and went off, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down that road, but when he saw him, he passed by on the opposite side. Likewise, a Levite came to the place, and when he saw him, he passed by on the opposite side. But a Samaritan traveler who came upon him was moved with compassion at the sight. He approached the victim, poured oil and wine over his wounds, and bandaged them. Then he lifted up on his own animal, took him to an inn, and cared for him. The next day, he took out 2 silver coins and gave them to the innkeeper with the instruction, 'Take care of him. If you spend more than what I have given you, I shall repay you on my way back.' Which of these 3, in your opinion, was neighbor to the robber's victim?" He answered, "The one who has treated him with mercy." Jesus said to him, "Go and do likewise." The Gospel of the Lord.
The question that Jesus asks this young individual after he asks, "What must I do to inherit eternal life?" the man refers to a very ancient and God-given reality after the Jewish people come out of Egypt and are headed to the Promised Land. And it's known as the Shema. Found in Deuteronomy chapter 6, that you are to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. And then to drill this into your children, your children's children, and so on. And Jesus replies, "Yes, you have answered correctly. Do this, and you will live." So it's one thing to know what God asks of us, and to live that out. And that's the tension. if we live honestly, if we're striving to be a Christian, if we're trying to grow in holiness, if we desire Him being Lord of our life, to do what He asks, that we may live. You know, I would put it to you this way. There is a difference between living and existing. Existing on the low level is you take up space. You move around. You have breath. You have a heart that pumps blood throughout your body. You're existing. You're animated. But to live implies something beyond your merely biological function. You know, Blessed Pier Giorgio Frassati. If you don't know much about Blessed Pier Giorgio, he died young age, polio. A lot of people ended up at his funeral because he was serving the poor men and women of Italy that who had themselves had polio. He would go and he would be in the world but not be of the world, and he would go out and have fun with his mates and go climb mountains and have a good time and still pray and learn how to not just exist but live. And he had this line that, you know, he said it this way: without a patrimony to defend, without the steady struggle for truth, that is not living, but existing. The steady struggle for truth. The patrimony reality is of the gift of God the Father to you and I. What's this gift? Well, it's the gift of our humanity lived with His grace. And how often are we not living that way, but just merely existing? And then the reality that we're called to live in a particular manner is to live with the same love that we have for our God and of ourselves, and display it and manifest that in our neighbor. I had to do a little research because I'm not last minute on my preaching preparation, but it's like, oh, there's something I really want to figure out, and I had to look it up because I didn't really want to shortchange the gift of what the translation meant in neighbor. Neighbor is an Old English word. It means near dweller. So on the light level, on the simple level, then you can say, well, who is my neighbor? Well, it's the one that lives nearest me. So if you're living in a house, well, it's the people that live nearest you on the street, yada, yada, yada. But then there is something more of a depth to what Jesus says of neighbor, because the Greek word carries much more of a connotation that demands us to say, well, it's not just the nearest one. It's almost everyone. It's those that are members of the area that we're a part of, or the same class that we belong to, or the nearest reality of the human to us. And so it carries that depth. And the reason why I say this is because I came to this realization that if I'm going to be a neighbor to somebody, if I'm going to know who my neighbor is, it's going to practically be anybody who's at the beginnings, middles, or ends of their lives. And that's got to be consistent. That I love that person no matter where they are in their state of life. And why do I say this now? Well, culturally, it's a really big deal. Because culturally, yeah, federally, we don't have abortion as a reality to worry about. But to be consistent in my love of my neighbor means I love the beginnings of the human, the middle life of that human, and the end of their life as well on this earth. And to trust in Jesus so much so, you and I must learn to love through the existence of one's humanity. That sounds very dense. Let me make it a little less jargony. No matter the human, no matter the age of the person, I'm to love them as neighbor, as Christ commanded me to. And even better than that, even more intense, to not have them seem competitive. Like one is more important than the other. Because when we do that, we reduce the person. We treat them like a thing or an object. And Christ doesn't dare say that of any one human. In fact, all he does, he works miracles on all age and level, right? Lazarus was dead. The little girl was dead. She was in her beginnings. He was toward his ends. And both were raised to life. The hemorrhaging woman in the middle of her years, right? If I could but touch his cloak and be healed. Who touched him, right? Not he's asking because he's surprised, because he knows very well what's going on. But to display our love of neighbor demands that we know who the neighbor is. And to know that the qualification of neighbor is not up to our discretion, but of Jesus's. And as a result, you and I must learn that and to be consistent in that. Because a lot of flack comes to people like ourselves because, well, how can you love the beginnings of someone's life and not love the reality of their ends in terms of, say, capital punishment? And the church has made it very clear that that's not a good recourse. And that we have a better means of treating the convict. Or in the middle of someone's life, especially if marital issues, right? Am I a good neighbor to that family or to that husband and wife who are really struggling in the unitive or procreative dimension of their life? Are we willing to will their good and not allow for evil? Because anytime we reduce the person, anytime we put another in competition with each other, what ends up happening is we shortchange the ability to love our neighbor. And as a result, we become, as Christ would call us, hypocrites. Our heart is not aimed high enough to love. Rather, it's low and petty. The gospel is very challenging, and it should be. It should be for every one of us. Not challenging to demean us or to denigrate, but to challenge us to aim higher, as Christ would call us to be better. And as he did with this young man, right? He leveled, the man wishing to justify himself, and boy, oh boy, can we do that. We press the question. Jesus is like, you want to go there? Fine. Here we go. Are we willing to not only know the law, but live it? Are we willing to know how to live that law in confidence? And to know its consistency? Because should we not, then we're in need of repentance and conversion. And should we strive to, we will be living and not merely existing. As Jesus said, you've answered correctly. Do this, and you will live.